Okay, well, I mean, I've always been a Star Trek fan since I was a child. I mean, and I grew up on the original series. I'm old enough that I started, before they made any of the movies or the Next Generation or any of the other Star Trek shows. But I can say when they had the other shows, I loved all of them too. And so, so now we have Discovery, and I wasn't sure because, hearing about it, you're not sure, and we knew that it was going to be a prequel. I wasn't really happy with that. I would rather they set it in Star Trek's future, make it like 80 years after Voyager. I think that would have been better. But we got the prequel show, and and they're trying to make it fit in the Star Trek timeline. My opinion is it doesn't really fit that well, but I understand that they are going to make it fit as we go along. There's only been one season, and as far as this season, I have to say it started out kind of rocky. And so I wasn't sure at first, but I think after about maybe 5 or 6 episodes, then it drew me in. It got really good. So for those of you that haven't seen it, I think if you ever decide to watch it, you do have to watch it in order. It's a story arc that goes through in order. And so, so don't give up on it is what I want to say. After you get through a few of the worst episodes, then you get to the really good episodes.
Awesome. So I think when I first found out about Star Trek Discovery, I, like everyone else, was like, really? It's on the CBS platform and I have to pay for that? Like, are you serious? And then I just, sort of evaluated, well, if I buy a couple of drinks somewhere, that's the subscription. So I try to measure everything in alcohol, and that was a very, very low alcohol consumption bar. So I was like, what the heck? So I went ahead and got it. In the beginning, it was really hard to get into. It's the first Star Trek that is not told through the eyes of a captain. And so as you're sort of being navigated through the story arc through the eyes of Michael Burnham, who, by the way, ends up being a mutineer, and that in itself caused some issue with me. It was just hard for me to sort of embrace any of the characters right away. But after about episode 3-4, that's where things start to sort of congeal, and you're like, okay, this really is going somewhere, and then you've got all of the plot twists and things like that. I, too, am a diehard fan of the original series. I just love the original. It's what I grew up with as well. I think I share with people the first movie that ever made me cry was Star Trek II when Spock died. I was like, oh my God. I was inconsolable for a week. But I just have a lot of love for that show. And so with that, when the Next Generation came out, although it was, very modern looking and it was very, the special effects were better, you could argue that the acting was better. It was hard for me to embrace it just because my bar was the original series. And so, to have a captain like Jean-Luc Picard, who was not the rugged, let's go get him that Kirk was, it was hard for me to even like him for a long time. So when I think back to Discovery, I think one of the things that captured my attention early on with Discovery was the fact that if you remember the very first episode of Discovery, it opens up with, it opens up with Giorgio, and it opens up with Burnham sort of walking lost in a desert. And then you start thinking immediately about the Prime Directive, right? Because they're there to figure out how they can solve a drought. And it's sort of like, well, looking at the Prime Directive, should you really be solving for this drought for this species of people? And so there's always that tension around how much do you interfere in another world as opposed to helping, and how do you define helping, and who gets to decide what that is. So that was the first thing that sort of caught my attention, and I think that is a common theme among all of the Star Treks, even the modern movies. There's always that tension of how much do you interfere, and how do you reconcile that with the Prime Directive. So with that, the other thing that captured my attention was the Klingons, and how the Klingons were not unified. And I think there are 24 houses, I believe. Yes. So the 24 houses of the Klingons, all of a sudden, you've got Volk, and you've got what's the other guy?
T'Kuvma.
So T'Kuvma. And they're we must unite. But the interesting thing is when you think about Klingons and how they're kind of barbaric, they were trying to unite around faith. and you know, who was a torchbearer. And so that had a theme that I thought was very different than what I was accustomed to, and it sort of resonated with some of the things that I remembered in Deep Space Nine. And so, so those were the big things that captured my attention right away. I would say that Star Trek Discovery is definitely one of the darkest of all of the Star Treks.
And literally and figuratively.
Yes, that's very true. I think Discovery is a good example of, you know, the producers trying to figure out, can we bridge? Because when you look at, like, the new movies, right, with the new people, and you think about, you know, whether or not that's really true Star Trek, you know, like, are those characters, is the storyline, like, you just sort of go through your checklist of whether or not you think this is, like, this really fits in with Gene Roddenberry's vision. And wherever you land on that, those movies did capture, like, a new generation of people who are now interested in Star Trek. And so is Discovery now the thing that's glossy and shiny enough to keep their attention, yet true enough to original Star Trek to keep our attention? So I feel like that's where Discovery is.
And the answer is no, I say, because a non-fan will never pay for something that they have no interest in.
That's exactly
A
right.
non-fan will flip channels and see something that they like.
That's true.
Or hear something from a friend, but you have diehards. When we went on the Star Trek cruise, there were people that were spending thousands of dollars on a cruise, and they said, "No, I don't want to pay $6 for a show." And I'm like,
that blows
oh my
mind.
God!
Yeah.
Like, how?
But yeah, Enterprise happened in the timeline. It's about 150 years before the original series. Now Discovery is a little closer to the original series. It's only about 10 years before the original. Mm-hmm. But as far as differences, I believe in Enterprise they hadn't really formed Starfleet yet, even though they had a ship with a captain, they had ranks, but they didn't quite have Starfleet or the right. Out of being for more adults, but it's still an enjoyable show.
I remember the first time I looked at it and the F-bomb was thrown. I was like, now, I'm a person that uses it probably 50 times a day, but to be looking at Star Trek in that environment, I was just like, did they just say that? So, you know, there's a high bar, I think, that was set with the first Star Trek, you know, when you think about just sort of ethics and conduct in general. And then now to have a Star Trek that's a little bit more, I guess, real, or they're trying to be very authentic in how they're presenting the characters. You're like, well, you know, it's like you're already having to suspend disbelief, right, around a lot of the technology. And to move a step forward, you're having to suspend whatever perception around ethics and morals and conduct that you may have had when you look at the other series.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.